Final Fantasy XIV hot takes on the menu, on the docket, for your viewing consumption. I asked for them, you delivered, and if you want the chance for me to react to your own hot take, leave it in the comments down below about Final Fantasy XIV. But let's start right on into this. We have at Elvin G28781, who says, my hot take, the Warrior of Light needs a loss. A big one that hits them hard and shakes up their confidence. I kind of agree, but I think they need to handle it really carefully. Because at this point in the story, the Warrior of Light is extremely powerful, and we have been through a lot. So if some, like, Joe Schmo comes out of left field or something, and just absolutely bodies the Warrior of Light, it'll feel really inelegant. I imagine in a similar way to the way that I felt when Xenos whooped us at the very beginning of Stormblood. When all of a sudden there was just this other guy who just randomly showed up, and after all the things that we had been through and all the trials and tribulations that we had been able to conquer, all of a sudden we're just getting absolutely bodied by this rando who just showed up with a barrel full of swords. Now, I eventually fell in love with that character with Xenos, but initially that was an off-putting element of Stormblood for me. And also there's the fear that the story would just end up being predictable, because does anyone expect that if they do introduce a character that is able to single-handedly best the Warrior of Light, does anyone really expect that we make it out of the expansion without beating them? Like, you know what I mean? It's like, I think the Warrior of Light kind of needs to take a loss or get some kind of power reset, just so the overall scaling of the power that we have to come across doesn't continually just go up and up and up and up and up from here. They managed to scale it back a bit with Dawntrail, because Wuklamut took the primary role as the protagonist for the story, at least until 7.2, but it has been a while since we've actually come across a threat or a face in Final Fantasy XIV where we were even, like, remotely struggling with the idea, can we beat them? Are we even strong enough? You know what I mean? It's like, I think the last one we came across like that was like the Endsinger. And in that fight, we still needed Dragon Xenos to act as our platform for us. I don't think it's strictly necessary to tell good stories, right? Like, I don't think the Warrior of Light needs to take a loss. I just think it opens up a bunch of new doors if you rein in the power of the Warrior of Light somewhat. So not every big villain has to come into the scene like, oh, this guy is a world-ending threat. You know, the typical shonen power scaling issue. Where to one-up yourself from the last villain, the new guy has to be even more powerful, and it just keeps going up and up and up and up from there. And eventually, at some point down the line, the series loses a bit of its identity. Luckily, Final Fantasy is kind of known for fighting God at the end of each of the games, so in like a weird way, Final Fantasy is really well situated, just based on historical precedent, to deal with like ever-scaling and ever-increasing power levels. You can always write it in such a way to feel Final Fantasy by having us fight some giant, powerful, godlike entity at the end, is what I'm really trying to get at here. It's really interesting to think about what they're going to do from here. I still kind of think that the theory floating around that it's going to be a very Azim-focused storyline that we're about to embark on, I still think that one has the most legs to stand on and makes the most sense. And if we do end up dealing with other shards of the Warrior of Light of Azim, then that's a good way to still have stakes and to still have active threats that we could be like a bit concerned about. Obviously, at the end of the day, we're going to come out on top, right? But within the confines of that specific storyline, you still want to at least have the illusion that this is a struggle. I think the way they're trying to frame it, though, especially ever since Endwalker, is that, like, yeah, the Warrior of Light is extremely strong, but the real power comes from being able to call in 7 other equally powerful buddies to come in and just gang up on whatever threat they're facing. We can turn a 1v1 or a 1v2 into an 8v1 at a moment's notice, and that's like a really good source of our power, because as we saw, even in Dawntrail, when we fought Galulja, like, yeah, it was a draw, but we didn't win decisively. And maybe if the fight had continued to go on, we would have still come out on top, but it wasn't particularly quick either. So I think this is the way they're going to try and frame it from here on out, that the Warrior of Light is still this extremely powerful entity, but he's not like the Doomslayer coming in, just ripping and tearing and eviscerating everything in sight. That's only if you play Warrior. So yeah, I think there's multiple ways that Square Enix can write themselves out of this like little hole they've written themselves into, which is just a natural consequence of how long the story has really gone on for. It's not something that really makes me pessimistic about the future state of the story, anything like that. but I do think having the Warrior of Light take a decisive loss at some point could be a good way just to shake up the overall experience of a Final Fantasy XIV story, especially for a new expansion, possibly like 8.0 or something. It just needs to be written in such a way to where it doesn't feel forced or out of left field to such a degree where it feels unrealistic, right? Like, you can't just have some random foot soldier of a new army come in and just body us, right? But if you do end up going that route, you need to properly develop it. So even if first impressions might be a bit sour on a story like that, I think the biggest, most important element for writing a plot beat like that is the follow-up. Making them engaging characters or engaging faction, making us care about them, etc., etc. So it's like, the more I think about this, the more I'm talking about it. If you go this direction, you go this route of having the Warrior of Light take this big grandiose loss, there's going to be negative sentiment and reactions to that initially, right? Just like there was when Xenos whooped us back in Stormblood. I think the most important element would be the follow-up after that point, though. Making good use of those characters, and not just some cheap excuse to increase the stakes. Next up, we have @MistMonster, who gives us their ranking of Final Fantasy XIV expansions: Shadowbringers, then Endwalker, then Heavensward, then A Realm Reborn, then Stormblood, then Dawntrail as of now. Most of my list would also look very similar to this. I think I would just swap Stormblood to be higher than A Realm Reborn, and I think I keep Dawntrail where it is right now, at least. Though, if the remaining patches are able to knock it out of the park like 7.2 did for me, I could see a world where I put Dawntrail collectively over A Realm Reborn collectively. But yeah, as of right now, at this point in time, especially if we're only talking about 0.0 patches, my list would probably be like Shadowbringers, Endwalker, Heavensward, Stormblood, A Realm Reborn, then Dawntrail. And my list doesn't change even if we include patches. It's just Dawntrail has the potentiality to overtake A Realm Reborn if the remaining patches are of a similar quality to 7.2, since I really enjoyed 7.2 overall. Yeah, just overall, I really enjoy Shadowbringers, and I think from beginning, middle to end, it's the most well put together story in Final Fantasy XIV, though I also don't think Endwalker is necessarily that far behind. It's just Endwalker had a few more moments than Shadowbringers that really dragged their feet. I like the Loporrits, don't get me wrong, but a lot of those sections in Endwalker felt really agonizingly slow, especially since they came right before or after a big hype moment in the game. And I still quite enjoy Stormblood, even 4.0. But I think especially with the patches of Stormblood, and I've talked about this before, some of my favorite stories this game has ever had in the Stormblood patches. I thought it was a great lead-in to Shadowbringers proper. But let's move on to our next take, and this one's going to be a little bit spicy. We have @Bossy, who says, "So I have a hot take, mostly concerning the RP community. There's way too much reliance on modding, especially when it comes to looks, gear, and animations. For some people, it also encourages laziness. Why level up a character and go through all that effort to get nice looking clothes and hairstyles when you just mod it in as a level 2 and just hang out? There's also raid mods, which I know was explained in a WoW video you did recently, shout out to that one, but it applies to Final Fantasy XIV too." Well, first of all, thank you for the shout out, but also, I can kind of get where they're coming from in this regard, right? The idea and the motivation to grind something out and to acquire something in a game when you could easily just mod it in has to be a little bit draining and lessens that overall impact and experience when you know you could just mod it in instead of putting all this effort in. However, I think a lot of the times when it comes to community mods in this regard, and now bear in mind, I am not the most well-versed or knowledgeable on this subject. I do not mod Final Fantasy XIV. However, that's not because of a lack of desire to mod, it's simply because Final Fantasy XIV doesn't want me to, or really anyone. But I think a lot of these mods come from a place where people want this functionality, it's just the game itself doesn't support it. Especially when it concerns the character creator, right? There's a lot of mods out there that allow you to alter how your character actually looks. And I think the reason a lot of those mods exist is because the base game's character creator is not that particular particularly good. It's decent at some things, but it's a real letdown in others. And in an MMORPG where people want to be able to express themselves and to be able to create a character exactly to their liking, because you are asking the player to essentially live in this role within this game and to dedicate potentially hundreds, if not thousands of hours into this game, and specifically with this specific character, people want that character to be as close to what they really and idealistically want as humanly possible, and I don't think the base character creator allows people on the whole to achieve that. I've talked about it before in these hot take videos. A big issue that I have is that I play as Highlander, so I don't have eyebrows, because apparently there's a lore reason for that, and I think that's really stupid if that's the actual reason my guy doesn't have eyebrows. But also, the facial hair options in this game are absolutely atrocious and extremely limiting. Whenever given the opportunity, I always default to making a bald character with a red beard. The game technically lets me do it, but the beard options for Highlander are absolutely god-awful, and for some reason are tied with the specific face that you select. That is extremely limiting, and I'm sure this logic also applies to a whole bunch of other elements of customization in this game that I just don't particularly care enough to spend a lot of time looking at or customizing for my character. But at the end of the day, people have different preferences. And I think when it concerns a game like Final Fantasy XIV that is as renowned and beloved for its glamour as Final Fantasy XIV is, having what in many people's eyes is a lackluster character creator is an unnecessary thorn in the side of a lot of people. And a lot of people play this game on PC where you can mod things, right? It's not like an impossibility or anything like that. A ton of people do it. And when it concerns stuff like aesthetic mods or just customizing your character or even stuff like shaders, I don't particularly see the harm in allowing people to do that. Sure, the console demographic exists, but I don't see a reason to limit the PC demographic in the player base just because of that. And so long as it doesn't actually affect gameplay, and so long as it doesn't actually affect the way I'm interacting with other people in the game by making me necessarily a better player, because I have access to modded information and stuff like that, I don't see a problem with people being allowed and not have this like subconscious fear that they could potentially lose their account or get a ban if people just simply want to like alter the appearance of their character or include a shader to make the game pop and look the way they specifically desire. There's a lot of arguments people make as to why Final Fantasy XIV doesn't allow such functionality, and I tend to find a lot of those arguments fall apart when you look at any other game. Like, oh, it's against Japanese law, and there's a whole bunch of other games from Japan that get modded out of like 9 different holes and stuff like that. Bit of a weird way to describe that when I'm thinking about it, but you know what I mean, right? It's like, I can understand why Final Fantasy XIV doesn't want to go the way of World of Warcraft for the longest time, where that game and that scene has been so dominated by the add-on scene, and by utilities such as weak auras, that are able to relay and give you information that the base game simply doesn't give you in an effective way, or sometimes even at all. And World of Warcraft has had to go through a reckoning recently in regards to this issue. And they just talked about recently how they're going for a long-term solution to this problem by incorporating a lot of the functionality that combat add-ons give to you in that game, like a damage meter, like a way to track your cooldowns, or even a rotation helper. They want to incorporate a lot of that functionality baseline into the game, and then when all is said and done, and they're in a place where the base game is able to sufficiently support the player in this regard, they want to remove the ability for add-ons to really track combat-specific data. I think the wording and the nomenclature is a little bit different and specific, but it's generally like their main idea here. So you can still retain a lot of the cosmetic add-ons that Final Fantasy XIV doesn't allow at this point in time, but World of Warcraft does, while not having, ideally again, World of Warcraft be dominated by powerful add-ons like weak auras or like details and stuff like that. And it's honestly a direction that I wouldn't mind seeing Final Fantasy XIV go in either. Of course, the best solution to this, in my eyes, is just Square Enix giving the player base a lot more functionality and cosmetic customization baseline in the game. Things like actual facial hair options, more options just across the board, stuff like that, right? But like, even when it concerns shaders, I don't see the problem. So long as the information doesn't impact actual gameplay and give you a competitive advantage compared to people that don't have it. Because Final Fantasy XIV, unlike World of Warcraft, as of now, Final Fantasy XIV is on console. And while certain games have mods on console, the modding scene is not as well developed or fleshed out on console as it is in a PC environment. So I think it's perfectly understandable and reasonable not to want to allow add-ons or mods or plugins, whatever you want to call them, that give you some kind of advantage in a combat scenario, because the people who play on consoles would be disadvantaged for playing on the platform of their choosing, which I don't think is right either. And I think when it concerns this topic specifically for Final Fantasy XIV, people can get kind of lost in details instead of looking at the broader picture overall. Like when it concerns, say, a zoom hack and whether or not people should be allowed to have functionality in Final Fantasy XIV to zoom the camera out even more, well, an ultra-wide monitor isn't a hack or modification, but it essentially gives you similar functionality. We can get lost in the specifics of, say, a conversation like that, but I fear that in so doing, we lose sight of the grander overall discussion concerning Final Fantasy XIV right now. My personal stance is that I don't use mods, I don't use plugins, I don't use any third-party modification, to my knowledge. I don't know if OBS counts for Final Fantasy XIV, but it's not out of a lack of desire. If Square Enix gave the okay and they're like, hey, you do you, it's all good, we're not gonna be kicking up a stink or anything like that, I would probably use Reshade. At least in my eyes, I don't particularly see the harm in cosmetic modifications, particularly if they don't affect other people or other characters or other players. Going more so back to the point of this hot take specifically, I can understand that if you can just mod an outfit onto a character, it could like take away from the grind or the feeling of satisfaction of grinding out in-game to get a cool looking outfit, but it's not like someone else's mods override your game state, and I think it's more a symptom of people wanting more customization in Final Fantasy XIV than anything else. And with that, I'll call the video there for the day. Don't forget to leave your own hot take in the comments down below, and I may react to it in a future video. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe while you're down there. It really helps the channel out and helps support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, have a great day, go play some video games, and I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody, until we meet again!